Encounter Talks with Dawn at Gessner Ministries, a forum for discussing challenging topics, dissecting truth, discovering hope and light in a world that desperately needs revival.
Well, here we are. It's Friday and time for another round of Encounter Talks. Wes, I believe that when you started the message last week, the intent was to make it more of a series. So I think that to some degree, there's going to be a bit of bleed over, which I love because even I already noticed while listening to your sermon this week, I'm beginning to feel more fire under my in my belly as just a result of staying so focused on what we're talking about. But I think for me, the question was, what does God want from me that I'm looking at personally? And then you made a comment that he wants to give support to those that surrender to him. And it's a beautiful thought to know, if we're willing to live this surrendered life, right, God is there to help us be the best person that we could possibly be, to be the most effective person, I guess, that we could possibly be. And there's this big, broad question that I wish we could explore more detailed responses to it. And what does it really look like to be sold out? I mean, I hear that a lot, and I have my own thoughts what that means, but I would like to explore that a little bit. What does it really mean to be sold out and radically trust him?
Right. Is that a question?
Well, or if it's not a question, it's hopefully you have thought there that you might contribute to.
Well, so I do have some thought, and I don't have all the answers. I find myself on the eve of a decadal birthday. I guess I'll be 60 in April. And I find myself probably doing more spiritual review in my life than I've ever done. There are a lot of reasons for that. It's where I am in ministry. It's where I am in my personal walk of faith. I'm a voracious reader and have been for years. I have a lot of stuff in here and in my heart and my head. And I've heard thousands, I think probably thousands of sermons in my life. And bits and pieces of all those ramble around. You and I both were raised in a tradition that called for full surrender in terms like sanctification and holiness. And I know that not everybody agrees with that, not even from denominations that once flew that flag. Some are moving away from it. It's not very jazzy to talk about it, especially when you use phrases like dying out to self or those kind of things. But for me, it comes back to that. And I don't find it a Wesleyan notion. I don't find it an Arminian notion. I don't find it a denominational notion. I find it's in the Word of God. And I find it something that Jesus wanted for his disciples, for his followers. I find it in the epistles. I find it so much so that it almost makes me uncomfortable, which is good. And I've had people respond to this message from last week privately and talk about the fire that they are feeling, and they're so hungry to find a way to be completely sold out to God. They want that, even though the culture would distract them and say, don't do that. They literally want it. They long for it.
Yeah. And, I know that there's this piece to all of that, which is the very nature of sin. What is that? Because, and I guess for me, I think of this when I think of what is the essence of that sinful nature. And I think of it as it's a rebellion against restraint. because I do think that God is always there to restrain us. It's kind of like a father with his children, you know. He sees what's best for them, and he's trying to help them, and they don't want to respond to that. Just there's this natural tendency to resist this restraint that is part of who he is to help us.
Let me just give you the context. And I did not do this in the message. I used that verse in an isolated fashion, but the context in 2 Chronicles chapter 16 is Asa meeting with the prophet, because Asa had failed. It was in his final days. He had failed to believe God for something. And so this was the word. Listen to these verses right before that. Because you put your trust in the king of Aram instead of the Lord your God, you missed your chance to destroy the army of the king. Don't you remember what happened to the Ethiopians, the Libyans, and their vast army with all their chariots and charioteers? At that time, you relied on the Lord, and he handed them over to you. The eyes of the Lord search the whole earth in order to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him. And he followed up with, what a fool you have been. From now on, you'll be at war. That's the context. And it's a powerful word that, you can choose to walk in disobedience. You can choose to ignore those restrictions of the Lord. You can choose the boundaries, the guardrails. You can choose to ignore them. You'll probably go off the road down the cliff. But out of this conversation, so many thousands of years ago, we get this nugget that says the eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the earth, that he may strongly support those whose heart is completely his. That's a call to full surrender.
I think that I was noticing, like, there are these two parallels, because when you're discussing this tension, and that's probably not the best word because it's far more than just a tension, but the culture and its invasiveness into the church, the capital C church. I mean, you know, there are parallels, because some of the same concerns that we might have for the church are also concerns for us as individuals, right? I mean, they're kind of parallel in that sense of the word. But you, in your sermon on Wednesday, you talked about Nehemiah, and you pointed out, I think there were four different things there. Can you just encapsulate that for me? Do you recall what I'm talking about? Where he sat down, those.
Let me find. I'm looking for that too. Okay, when he heard the news of what was going on, even though he was in a very desirable position, he had sort of gotten the best of the best for being someone that was being in captivity, sort of like Daniel and others who got close to the wicked kings and worked for them. But when he heard it, it took the wind out of him.
Mm-hmm.
His heart became dislocated. He sat down, he wept, he mourned and fasted and prayed.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think where we are now as a culture and where we're heading into, the things have changed. I don't think we'll be going back anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the call of God is coming for men and women who are willing for their heart to be fully his. There's some work to be done. And probably to make that happen, we need to take on the burden of the church. So sitting down, weeping, mourning, and fasting and praying is a huge component.
Yeah,
it's carrying the burden of the Lord, I think.
Yeah. You also had gone on there. I think it was right close to that area of the message where you talked about the dislocated heart. Obviously, a bit more detail. I think you were using the P's to define that. Tell me a little bit about that too, if you would.
Well, the dislocated heart is just simply, again, it's so meaningful to me because those of us that are watching this, that live in the United States of America, You may not have as much money as Bill Gates, but in comparison with the rest of the world and the volume of people in the world, we are the richest people on the planet. Even the people that are in poverty in the U.S. are light years. That's a bad analogy, but we are so far ahead financially than the people that live in poverty every day struggling for food and clean water and on and on and on. Basics that we just take for granted. And so how do we, sitting here in the lap of luxury, so to speak, in the country of luxury, how do we get a dislocated heart for the marginalized, not only in our country, but around the world? And that's a huge, it's a big piece. I mentioned to you earlier, it reminds me of, if you believe the Apostle Paul wrote the book of Romans, and I have to say that because there's always some people around universities that question it.
Right.
Whoever said this, it's significant. In chapter 9 of the book of Romans, Paul said, "With Christ as my witness, I speak with utter truthfulness. My conscience and the Holy Spirit confirm it. My heart is filled with bitter sorrow and unending grief for my people, my Jewish brothers and sisters." That's a dislocated heart, but he takes it a step further. He said, "I would be willing to be forever cursed, cut off from Christ, if that would save them." We don't have time to get into that today, but that is a burdened heart and soul. And I can only think that he probably meant, if it meant him giving up his single eternity in heaven, if it meant the whole nation of Israel would turn to Christ, he would be willing to do what Jesus did, which was give up his life.
Yeah.
For that.
Yeah.
That's a big statement.
Yeah. You know, the other thing is this, Wes, it's like, if I want to become more like him, then it feels like I'm going to be even more anti-culture. And so there's this tension, because obviously the more I am immersed into being like him, if it means that I'm just moving farther and farther away from the culture, at some point, how do I exist? Because I'm supposed to be effective in this world, but not a part of it.
Well, that's why Jesus prayed the way he prayed. And it's why he prefaced that prayer with the comments to his disciples in the cram session times. The world's going to hate you because it hates me. And because you will have my message that you're sharing, it will hate you. We haven't experienced a lot of that in our country, but it's here and it's coming. And it's because not everybody that goes to our churches will feel this, because a lot of people have compromised what I believe are biblical absolutes and values. And so there's going to be some real separating coming on here in the future, where you'll decide, I'm either going to stand with what people think is the word of God, or I'm going to go with the culture. But for the most part, we haven't had a lot of pushback. For me, it is the tension of why Jesus prayed, don't take them out of the world. I'm putting them in the world, but don't make them of this world. And yes, that will produce some tension. But it also, if you're winsome, if you're filled with the Spirit and you manifest the fruits of the Spirit, you would think that your neighbors, your coworkers, the people that you interact with the most would see you as a positive human being, a loving person who loves in the way you should, cares for them, prays for them. And the politically correct people, they may hate you, but your neighbors probably won't, because you've lived the life of Jesus in front of them.
Yeah.
That's kind of the tension I see.
Yeah.
And again, the hate that's coming now is coming from government entities and politicians and media. And we won't get deep into this, but the case in point would be the Oral Roberts basketball team in the Sweet 16 having an article written just this week calling for their expulsion from the tournament even though they earned the right to be there because of their Christian beliefs, because of their biblical view of the world, which does not match right now what the world, what our country anyway has embraced and said is correct.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
I mean, that's as fresh as this week.
Yeah. Wow. So having a dislocated heart, Wes, I heard you say I think you used the word being burdened. I think that's what I heard you say. But for some of that, there's a culture within the church itself. You look at all of the various denominations or whatever. There's any number of cultures that make up the church as well.
Right.
And so when you say being burdened, that makes me think a certain thing in my mind, but define what that might really be, to be burdened.
Well, it's not a fun thing. It's not, people don't sign up for it. They'll sign up for potlucks. They may sign up for a small group. They may sign up for a church picnic or softball team, but very rarely do they sign up for, well, we don't give them the opportunity for the most part, but sign up here to carry the burden of Christ for this world. And yet that's what we're called to do over and over and over. And so what happens, I think the burden for me, and I'll give you my traditional view and I'll give you what I think it is today. In my past, I watched people come to the church that my dad pastored, that church does, one in particular. And I watched women who were Christians, whose husbands were not, carry a burden for their unsaved husbands. They would request prayer for them over and over and over. I had one lady come to the altar when I was speaking about 25 or 30 years ago, early on in my own ministry. I didn't know her. I was at visiting a church. I preached. She came down and she said something like that. I can't remember exactly, but she said, I responded tonight. As she knelt there, it was a Sunday night, I'll never forget it. She said, I responded tonight because my husband is not a Christian. And every time there's an altar call, I come. And she'd been doing it for 20 plus years. That's a burden.
Yeah.
That's a burden. So when you translate it to today, it may be that. It may be for a wayward child. It may be, I've seen it in my own home with my own wife at times, burden for her kids. Yeah. She doesn't demonstrate it often, but the other day she told me, she said, I just collapsed in the walk-in closet and got on my knees before God. Yeah. She was overwhelmed with a burden. Yeah. I didn't see it, but I visualized in my head. I think the greatest danger is that we get distracted. And I shared this story with you. I'll share it real quick. It's about when the Russian Revolution happened in 1917. Communism came in. The Russian Orthodox Church, on the very day that the Russian Revolution started in October, there's a story that goes that month, the Russian Orthodox Church was assembled in council, and the biggest debate was the color of the robes that should be used in liturgical functions. They spent a whole month arguing over should they be white, as they were traditionally, or purple, whatever. And I think it's not that we're arguing about robes, hopefully today. We may not be arguing about anything, but we're just not engaged in the burden of the Lord. And then what slowly people are starting to wake up, because we're now going, oh, I thought it was, God, baseball, and apple pie in America, or whatever you want to say. And we're a long ways from that.
And that makes me think that we could almost be misdirected with our burden. I mean, we could be, you were just talking about the robes. I mean, it almost feels like they were burdened about that, but it was a misdirected burden, right? Yeah.
And we had the worship wars a few years ago while people were arguing about, and still probably somewhere to this day, arguing about worship songs versus hymn books and this and that. And I have my own preference. but I've certainly done ministry with both and seen the benefit of both. But again, the devil loves those kind of things.
Yeah.
Rome's burning and we're over here playing our fiddles.
Yeah.
And it's perfect. In fact, he doesn't care how much we go to church, as long as we're not affecting the culture and calling people out of sin.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think too, what I was hearing is, the burden that we would express as having a dislocated heart is probably something that it never leaves us in that sense. Whatever it is, it's something we're carrying it constantly. It may not be in the very forefront of our thinking 24/7, but it's always there, and it doesn't take much of a reach for it to be front and center. But it's something we live with on a daily basis, I believe.
Let me. I didn't think to do this, but your last interview outside of the ones we've had together was Aaron Willis, and he'll be uncomfortable with me, and he won't remember this story at all.
Yeah.
But he was in my first church in French Lick, Indiana. They had a ministerial convention. I think it was in Washington, Indiana. Aaron had just come back from overseas. I don't remember where he was, and I don't remember all the details of the story, but I believe he might have been trapped.
Yeah.
Some other tourists on the roof of a hotel. There were terrorist stuff going on.
It was in Cairo, I believe.
Okay. And he was speaking. Now, that was a lot of years ago. And I'm pretty close to his dad and close to the family. And it was a long day. And I remember I thought, I'm going to go downstairs in the church. Somebody else was speaking. It had speakers all day, and he was going to speak that night. And I thought, I'm just going to find a Sunday school room. I want to say I was going to pray, but I probably was going to try to find a place just to lay down for a minute on a table or something. I was just tired. And I opened the door, and he was sitting with his Bible open and tears streaming down his face. And he was preparing to preach. And that image, and I'm not holding him up as anything except a godly man, but that image I will never, ever, ever forget.
And what you also know about that moment is that it wasn't because he was doing it for any kind of recognition, because he was alone in that moment.
Right. And I barged in on it.
Yeah.
That's the burden of the Lord. For me, and again, not to hold my mother up as anything, but my whole life, Don, I would come home from school where I would hear in the mornings in a room with the door shut in a fervent prayer, praying for my dad, who was a pastor, or praying for the people in the church. Again, I can still hear that in my mind. I don't hear the words that she was saying, but I hear that rhythm of a burdened heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I know I've been exposed to what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I never want to take on the thought that it's all something that was and it's not today, because when you were expressing that about your mother, I thought, and this is a little bit personal in a sense, or here right at Westside Church, we have a young staff member. And if I were to say there's an example of a young person, he's probably right around 30 or give or take. And I have seen him express some of what you are sharing there from your mother or from O.W. Willis that you were mentioning.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, it's encouraging that it can happen, and it doesn't matter if it's something of the past. It can happen today as well, and it has to happen.
And I want to say this, and I know we probably need to wrap it up, but I am talking in these messages and in our conversations, not from a vantage point of saying everybody come to where I am. Yeah. I'm preaching to myself. I'm working hard to peel off all the stuff that attaches itself to me on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. To focus, to get into the Word of God, to spend time in prayer. And it's a battle. It is a hard battle to do it at the level I feel like I need to do to be that person with the heart who is fully His.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to make sure that's said. I wish I was up the road, and if I was, I probably wouldn't be talking at all.
Well, hopefully we're all seekers.
Right.
Well, I look forward to continuing the conversations in the next couple of weeks as well. So thanks so much for today, Wes.
All right.
Have a good day.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Thanks for watching. Take a moment to share with your friends.